does the 1 year deal they gave him undermine him? And can the players take him seriously, knowing that he has just a 1 year deal? Then of course it does. I'm Rich Lewis. This is You've Only Come to Hear United, and this is why Erik needs a contract extension. So I held off doing this show immediately after the Porto and Villa draws. Well, as this set of games, including the Spurs defeat, became all about whether or not the manager was going to keep his job. Now, unless anything amazing or particularly awful happened against Villa and Porto, the likelihood was that Ten Hag was his job was going to be up for review, and the rumour mill was going to go into overdrive. And the games and what happened in them would be largely irrelevant unless they really move the needle in terms of fans' perception of the manager. And that ultimately didn't happen. In fact, the Villa game was massively forgettable, and both teams will have been disappointed with their performances, in my opinion. So the sensible thing to do for me was to wait and see what came off the back of the Villa game, and then record an episode to talk about either Ten Hag losing his job or INEOS deciding to keep him. But frustratingly, we don't seem to have got a decision either way. So that brings me back to where we left off last time. Now, as you know, my personal opinion, that hasn't changed. I think it's time to move on from the manager. And for me, there are three areas which I think are in his control that could ultimately be his downfall. So, first of all, grouping these together, team selection, rotation and substitutions, I think they all intertwine and they're all effectively pretty much complement each other. So Rashford versus Porto, for example, he was absolutely flying in that game. As you know, those of you who watched it, and the last person you thought who was going to come off at half time was going to be Marcus Rashford. Lo and behold, Rashford's off, and we're all thinking it must be an injury. No, it's not an injury. It's for rotation purposes, which makes absolutely no sense in the grand scheme of things. Now, it's not the only thing we've seen. That's been done to death by different people. Now, we've seen defenders coming on for the last 10 minutes of games, changing the centre-backs. Maybe they're worried about what happened last season and the injuries we had, so maybe they thought that's one way we can sort of manage their minutes and not, overstretch them. But it feels like such an odd thing to do, and maybe doesn't necessarily have a massive impact on the games that happens in either. We're not getting any consistency because of the changes he's tried this season. We were heavily impacted by injuries last year, so you can see that Erik ten Hag's tried to put out, like, for example, a regular backline. That might be more something that's been forced upon him because of the injuries we've had, and he's still having the left back situation where Shaw and Malacia are concerned. It's you got big money signings on the bench too. Ugarte has not lit up the place since he's came in. It's probably understandable that he's not come straight into the team. But when you're not playing great and you're looking on the bench, Xerxes on the bench too in previous matches, it's not a great look. You've got Anthony sitting back there as well, who obviously hasn't had a great time since he came to Manchester United. Pretty decent start when he very first joined, and that season sort of tailed off, and last year was pretty bad by everybody's accounts. Again, that doesn't reflect brilliantly on the manager either. So you've got Bruno, who, going back to Rashford and talking about rotation, he seems to be an exception to this as well. Bizarrely, you can't bring off a player who's flying in the first half, call it rotation, and then your attacking centre midfielder, who is stinking up the place, is somehow still starting every single game. It doesn't make any sense at all. And then you got to wonder, is he picking the right front three? We're struggling for goals. I personally think that's more of a system issue than an individual player issue. I know some people are looking at their outputs and what they've done in previous years and saying, can we realistically expect them to do X, Y, and Z? Well, I think with a different structure and different setup, a different tactical approach to the game, we'd be getting a lot more out of them. But until we actually see that, then we don't really know. So it could be one thing or the other. The second area is he has a habit of putting his foot in his mouth. He really does. He's not the only Manchester United manager since Alex Ferguson retired who has a habit of doing this. The big one for me, which it was the first time I really started to doubt him as manager and started to make me go back and forth between, he's the right guy, he's not the right guy, he is. It was the comments about not having the players here to play the way he did at Ajax. And I thought, well, why have we signed you then? You know, obviously the easy answer to that is we signed you because you're a clever manager. You don't obviously have to go and do what you did one place and take it here. You know, you can come up with a way of playing which better suits the players we have here. Okay, that's fair enough. You know, a good manager is worth his salt should be able to do that. But we brought you here because of what you were doing there, what you achieved with Ajax, and is it not worth trying that? And to say you didn't have the players then, okay, you were still building a team, but a lot of the players now that are here have either played for him before or at least have come here under, you know, on his watch, and maybe have grounded in the type of football and way of playing that he'd prefer. So I'd like to see journalists, somebody revisit those comments and say, look, you previously said this, but with the signings you've made this summer, are you closer to playing that way? Or because you see Manchester United historically of playing a different type of football, does this mean that's abandoned? And if that's abandoned, then does what you did at Ajax go completely out the window? Do you want us to remember what happened there based on that way you played, in terms of what you could still do with Manchester United? Or on the other hand, do you want us to kind of forget that and then just judge you on what you're trying to do here, because that's going to be different? And if so, it's not working at the moment. So for me, that was a massive one. And there were other things too, as we mentioned before, the Rashford comments on the substitution situation. He's constantly brought up on his mentions of the two trophies he's won, and sort of framed us as being the second most successful club over a period of time to City, which is true based on trophies in the last few years. But it kind of ignores what we can all see happening on the pitch too. So it's a tricky one. I can understand why he goes there. He's left with a little, not much room to manoeuvre in how to answer those questions, because obviously the media are regularly setting traps for him to stumble over, which he does on occasion. So he isn't left with many choices in terms of defending himself, but it just doesn't come across great. I said back in the Netherlands that his communication wasn't the best, and in a second language you can see I think it's even worse over here. So that's something that really has got him into a bit of trouble, I think. Then it's the formation and the system, and he seems to have a sense of inflexibility there. So I think most of the success we've had, having said that, are on the occasions where I feel like he has changed what he probably ideally wants to do, is deviated from that. So the first year, I think with the hiring goal and knowing he wasn't the best at playing out from the back, I think very early on after the defeats in the first two games of the season, he compromised on that to try and get a little bit more out of us and not put us in too much trouble. So the playing out from the back got put to one side a little bit. There's been the FA Cup final, obviously, against Manchester City, where and towards the end of last season in general, where we seemed to just change the system and the shape and do something which was a little bit more conservative, but it got us over the line. This season, I think there was an element of that at the start. We saw that sort of 4-4-2 or 4-2-2-2, however you want to look at it. We had Fernandes and Mount before Mount's early injury, pressing, we saw it a bit in pre-season. There's something that could work there. It never seemed like a long-term solution, but it was something he'd found that worked. And then it felt like when Mount came out of the team, we lost that a bit. It was good having a focal point in Xerxes while Højlund was injured. We started to see the midfield feeling quite separate gradually again, which had started off looking more solid. And then you see things like the Liverpool game and, Casemiro getting exposed. But we've seen it with Ugarte too, since he's come into the team, mainly when he's played deeper. I think that the person who's meant to be linking the defence and the midfield can often seem very, very isolated, and it feels like something he's very insistent upon doing, that the way we're building up. And obviously you can understand the manager wanting to sort of hammer home the way he builds up to get the players used to it, which makes sense. You don't want to have to keep flipping backwards and forwards between things, and players never getting used to the way you want to play, but it's the way he wants to play the best way for us to play. I think it can work if you've got the right players to do it, and yet we've had the opportunity to buy players who can do it, and we're still looking not great. He seems to be quite insistent on Dalot inverting from left back to give us more strength in midfield, but can often leave us exposed on the left hand side. So is that working? And then I'm getting very much a sense of a Frank Sinatra. If I'm going to go out, I'm going to have done it my way, about the whole approach from Erik Ten Hag. And I think it's within his grasp to to have made his circumstances better. And sometimes I feel like he's refusing to do so because he wants to do things in a particular way. And yeah, as I say, that the times that maybe we've done, had some great results under him when he's compromised on his ideals a little bit. Now, all that being said, if INEOS do decide to stick with him, then there's 3 things that they really must take into account as well. So you looked, you being INEOS, at a ton of managers in the summer, and you stuck with the manager, the one we already had. Now, does the start of this season change that? You think, you got to look at how he performed, and there's got to be some doubts there now. Was that the right thing to do? And the second thing is, they've got to ask themselves, can this get better? Now, I don't know if there's enough evidence to suggest what's happened at the start of the season reinforces the decision they made in the summer. We've seen elements in games that look really promising, but what's massively worrying is how we've managed to take that promise and somehow flush it down the toilet. It's evaporated from our game, and things have got a lot worse, and it's the wrong trajectory. We were playing really well in parts of games, and you could really see things coming together, and it's weird how that seems to have so quickly dissipated. Now, we don't see behind the scenes. That's one thing that I think is getting ignored a lot recently. People acknowledge it sort of without really acknowledging it in some of the things that they say. So if people have been waiting for INEOS to make a decision on Ten Hag, and they're thinking, why haven't they pulled the trigger? We're not seeing the progress. Maybe behind the scenes on the training pitch, maybe what the board are seeing, they can see things improving. We saw Rio go to the training ground earlier in the year, I think for TNT Sport, and he came out saying, like, there's such a togetherness here. You could really see some things positively changing. So, maybe there is more going on there, and maybe that's going to factor into INEOS's thinking as well. The third one, and this is probably the big one for INEOS, is, are you prepared to finish outside the top 4? Because that is a realistic possibility at this point. And can you afford to do so? Because the longer you leave it, the less likely, as it is right now, the less likely it is that you're going to finish there. So that's a big question for them. They've got to really trust that Erik ten Hag can do it. And if they can afford to, that's a different question. Maybe it's something they've already factored in. There are people listening to me now going, well, what chances have we got of finishing the top 4? Maybe that was never a realistic expectation going into this season. For me, it was, and for me, and people will think I'm deluded, but a title challenge is, it always is. And I think if you're a half decent team in the Premier League, until it's not a possibility, that has to be your aim. And I'd say the top sort of 8 or 9 teams in the league, as ridiculous as it might feel for, even for teams like Newcastle and Aston Villa to take the next step, for example, they should be looking at the title. Why not? I mean, we saw what happened with Leicester keeping a squad together. Now people picked them out as a freak anomaly, but they did it. That's it. You can't ignore it. You can go, it'll never happen again, but people would have said it would have never happened in the first place. And we've got better quality teams now than that who can compete. And we've just seen Aston Villa beat Bayern Munich in the Champions League. And so for the resources that have been ploughed into Manchester United, the signings that we've made, what we're trying to do in terms of beefing up the squad and the structure of the club and what INEOS have already done, I think you have to have aspirations of having a challenge. Yeah, that might be a challenge that fades away quickly even before Christmas, but you want to be up there. But we haven't even come close to touching, the top 2 places, let alone the top 4. And at the moment, the top 10, it's out. To be 14th in the league is crazy, absolutely crazy. So the idea of us finishing the top 4 this season is looking very, very slim right now. So after that, if they decide that, yes, Erik ten Hag is the man, then I say give him a proper contract. Does the 1-year deal they gave him undermine him? And can the players take him seriously, knowing that he has just a 1-year deal? Then of course it does. This was always going to happen. Once you had some bad results at the start of the season, all it took was a few, especially with the fixture, when the fixture list came out, and you've got Liverpool so early on too. That was going to be a real big test for Ten Hag. And for us to have the 3-0 defeats against Liverpool and Tottenham in particular, some underwhelming results around that, it was going to be difficult. And when you're on a 1-year contract, and even going into this season, you've got to wonder, are the players looking at that going, yeah, he's the man, we've really got to pull out all the stops here, because this man dictates our future at Manchester United? Probably not. They might be thinking themselves after a couple of bad results, he's probably not going to be here, so very long. The board clearly didn't want to give him a new 4-5 year, or even a 3-year deal, just to say he is the man that we're going to take forward. Now, can we go on with a cloud over us, after every game, week to week, or even just from international break to international break? Is that sustainable? Well, of course not. I mean, fans want that sense. If you give the manager that sense of security, at least people can get behind him. I mean, does leaving a concrete decision beyond this point risk throwing the season in the bin? Yes, it does. I think doing it now, you will get if you make a decision now, a solid decision, you will get the fans on side. You'll probably possibly get the players on side as well. If you give Ten Hag a contract now, a proper contract, it gives the whole season a different context too, because people are looking at this at the moment as an extension of what's already been, because his contract's an extension of what's already been. People will be looking at this going, well, we could see the signs last season. He was lucky to keep his job, and this has just been a continuation so far this year. You can't ignore that. If INEOS in the summer went and gave him a decent length contract, they could reframe the whole thing of what's going on at the moment as this is the year one of INEOS. They could have made a really big statement to say this is a completely clean slate and a fresh start, and we're going to be giving him time. But a 1-year contract doesn't do that. It just doesn't give him that, that sort of that firm grounding at the club, and that I think that has probably made things really hard for him. As soon as the Liverpool result happened, really, I think it put him in a really, really difficult position, and it's probably not fair on him in some respects. I think if they were going to stick with him, which they did, they really should have gave him the contract then. Otherwise, it almost makes no sense that they are sticking to him right now, because you could give him the season. Maybe they're waiting for somebody at the end of the year. I don't know. But you could give him the year, and if we end up finishing 7th or 8th, and we even win a cup again, you're going to sack him then? And people are going to go, maybe you should have just got rid of him back right now. I know some people will say we can afford to wait another window without committing one way or another, but as fans, we don't we ultimately just want to talk about the games and not the circus that has been Manchester United for the past 10 years? I think people do, really. I know, people like myself talking heads effectively, going over the games, and seem to thrive maybe more on what happens outside of them and around the club. For example, this show right now, I get that, and I get people being quite cynical about that. But I think if you really got down to it, the proper fans really just want to focus on the football. They do ultimately, and be able to enjoy the games and the moments that the games bring. And for too long now, we've almost become conditioned to having to focus on everything else that surrounds United, because stuff relating to the games happens for a little bit, and then obviously things seem to just completely kick off again, and we're back to having to talk about all the nonsense that surrounds games. And I'm just tired of this dragging on. And if they want to keep the manager, then commit to him and show the fans that this is a long-term project and he's not constantly on borrowed time. So, as I said, I think it's time for Erik Ten Hag to move on, but I will happily get fully behind him. Again, if the club do, and maybe that's the key here and something that's being missed. How can a club expect its fans and even its players to fully buy into somebody that you're only willing to give a 1-year extension to?